pleasure.
Thank you. Welcome to the regular board meeting of Gateway Community Chargers. We are still virtual.
And we lost him. Is that what happened?
Looks like he got disconnected.
Okay, well, we will all wait a moment for him to call back in, and then we'll just start again. It won't be a problem.
Okay, I think I'm back online. That was a little glitch here. Apologize for. Are we where we were?
Yeah, start again. Start again, Bruce.
Well, welcome to the regular school board meeting of the Gateway Community Charters. We are virtual as we have been for the last quite a while, and hopefully one of these days we'll be able to go non-virtual, but for the moment we are virtual, and because we are virtual, we have to approve our first order of business, approve the resolution ordered by the state, resolution 361, which authorizes us to hold our meeting virtually. And so I would entertain a motion to approve resolution 361.
I move approval.
Mr. Turner moved approval. Mr. Anderson second. Okay. We will vote by voice vote. Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
Mr. Block.
Yes.
Ms. Campbell is not present this evening. Mr. Turner.
Yes.
And myself, yes. That's 5 votes. We do have on our agenda this evening the annual audit, and I would like to recommend that we move that up in the agenda so that the auditors don't have to sit around all evening.
Should we do roll call first?
Thank you, Mr. Block. We do need to do a roll call. Mr. Anderson.
Here.
Mr. Block.
Yeah.
Ms. Campbell is not present this evening. Mr. Turner.
Present.
And I am present. Bruce Manjerick. So with that, with the approval of the board, Dr. Peterson, would you like to move that up before your comments or after your comments?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and have the auditors before so that they can be free after that.
Okay, would that be before any comments as well, community comments? Or should we have those first?
We could have the public comments first.
Okay, are there public comments?
Mr. Vice President, there are no public comments tonight.
Okay, there are no public comments. Then without further ado, we will move to the annual audit, which you all should have gotten a copy of and at least read the important 3 or 4 pages. And with that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent.
Well, I just want to have Miss O'Meara introduce our guest today from Gilbert and Associate, but I do want to affirm it's been a very collaborative process to get to meeting our January 31, which was unique deadline for this year. A lot of special funds, a lot of special circumstances, and of course a transition in our CBOs and our processes. But certainly I know everybody was working overtime to do this audit with integrity. And certainly I know you read the most important line, which is there were no findings, but Ms. Sarah is going to tell us much more than that. But O'Meara, if you would like to introduce, please.
Good evening, board. Yes, I would like to hand this over to Sarah to talk to us about more details in terms of what they audited, what they found, and the results of our audit. it was a lot of work, but we're happy to have worked with Gilbert and Associates to get our audit completed, and they were very thorough. And so I'm happy to send it over to Sarah to give the board some more information.
Okay,
of
good.
your
Thanks,
findings.
Myra. Good evening, everybody. I've seen some of you before. Sarah Ellis here. I was the engagement partner on the job, and Raul was the manager, and Jessica was also a manager on the engagement. Although I'm the only one here tonight. Is there a possibility that I can share my screen so I can go through the documents, the board report, and then highlights of the financial statements? Is that possible to do that?
Yes, you should be able to do that with just the green share screen.
Okay, great. Okay, can everybody see this document now and hear me okay? Okay, great. So to get started, we started on the audit in late October, and Amira was new in the role and taking over and closing books that really weren't under her tenure. So we really appreciate all the effort of Amira and Valerie and her team in preparing and getting through this audit with us. These communications, I'm going to talk through these required communications. These are things that we're required to communicate to the board. First off here is our responsibilities and opinions. And this states here, and this is in the engagement letter, but this reiterates that the financial statements are the responsibility of management. And as the independent auditor, our responsibility is to express an opinion whether the financial statements prepared by management with the board's oversight are materially correct in accordance with U.S. GAAP, the U.S. generally accepted accounting principles. So I'm pleased to report here, I highlighted some things here. We are issuing an unmodified opinion on the financial statements, and that means that they're clean, the best opinion you can get, that they're fairly stated in accordance with GAAP. We also spend time on, because you have over $750,000 of federal dollars, we spend time auditing your federal programs. And we also issued an unmodified opinion over your federal compliance. We tested 2 of the new programs under the CARES Act, and I'll touch on that. I'll show you that when I get to that schedule. But a clean opinion there. And then lastly, we spend time, the state compliance requirements of the Education Audit Appeals Panel issues an audit guide every year, and there's specific requirements that LEAs and charter schools have to abide by. And they require us to spend time on some certain procedures. So we performed all those procedures. And again, we issued an unmodified opinion on state compliance. We had no findings this year. We're also required to communicate our interactions with management. One of the elements here is if there were consultations with independent accountants, that would be what would be considered opinion shopping. Those other accountants would be required to speak with us and ensure we are apprised of the conversation and the opinion that they're gathering, and ensure that they're aware of all facts and circumstances. To our knowledge, there were no such consultations with other accountants. Disagreements with management. We're pleased to report that there were no such disagreements resolved or unresolved during the course of our audit. Management representations. At the close of the audit, we get management's representations that the financial statements are complete and accurate, and that all outstanding matters are disclosed as required. Once we get that letter, we're able to date the audit report, which was done on January 31st to meet the deadline. Difficulties encountered in performing the audit. As mentioned previously by Dr. Peterson, there was a unique year in that you had some turnover in your CBO role, and there were no significant dealing with management, although the close of the financial statements weren't ready upon audit. And so we just kind of moved and shifted our field work and adjusted our timeline and ensured that we can meet that January 31st deadline. Qualitative aspects of the accounting practices. So as part of our audit, or as management completing the financial statements, they're responsible for selection and use of appropriate accounting policies. We look at those policies annually. We make sure that they're following them. That's U.S. GAAP for nonprofit organizations such as yourself. There are no new accounting policies that were adopted in this fiscal year, and the existing policies were not changed. So just want to highlight that for you there. as management's closing the financials, there's significant judgments that are made in the estimating of those financial statements and the numbers that go into them. And some of those estimates are the collectability of receivables. Are they collectible, valid receivables? The selection and useful life of property and equipment, things that you're capitalizing, are they being amortized and depreciated over the proper period of time, the useful life? And then, of course, the allocation of your functional expenses between your program and your general and administrative. We look at those allocations, we look at all the useful life, and we looked at the collectability of receivables and made sure those estimates were reasonable. The results of the audit, we're pleased to report that, the scope was not significantly changed, although we had some delays. There wasn't anything new or additional that we had to do other than what we knew about as related to the CARES Act and the new requirements under the K-12 audit guide. Other finding audits and issues, we generally discuss a variety of matters. Management would at times reach out to us throughout the year. I remember early in the year when they were implementing new standards for, attendance tracking and the distance learning during the 2021 fiscal year. We have conversations about that. All of those conversations are in the normal course of our professional relationship. There wasn't anything that was, a contingent on them hiring us or anything that would be something we needed to communicate to the board as inappropriate. Finally here, significant adjustments that we identified as part of our audit. There was only one entry that was related to lottery revenue and receivable, and that had to do with the fourth quarter that was published as far as the rate change. And so Amira provided that at the close of the audit during our audit for an adjustment to the final lottery apportionment for all of the schools. And then finally, we found one adjustment that we, with management's concurrent, agreed that it's not material to the financial statements as a whole, but we are required to let you know about it. And it's there was just a prepaid expenditure that actually was offsetting an accrual for workers' comp. And so basically workers' comp was paid. It was just posted in a liability account rather than an asset account. Again, it's not materially misstated in the financials. Management chose to leave it where it was, and we were fine with that. And then finally, I'm going to highlight in the report, there's a lot of supplementary information required by the oversight agencies. We look at that information and we also ensure that in relation to the financials as a whole, that it's fairly stated. And so our opinion there is that it's fairly stated in relation to the financial statements as a whole. The CFA, any time schedules or any of the schedules that are required in the supplementary information by the oversight districts. Shall I highlight there? Any questions about any of that information I just went over? Okay, great. I'm going to highlight, and I know you guys have a time limit here, so I'm going to just highlight some things in the financial statements. Again, we audit the consolidated financial statements for Gateway Community Charters. So you have all of these schools, which you have separate financial tracking for all of them. However, we issue our opinion on the financial statements as a whole. Here's our the table of contents. I mentioned the independent auditor's report. The independent auditor's report and then these other independent auditor reports are all of our opinions and information that's issued by us. The financial statements and the supplementary information is management's information. So just going to touch on a few things as related to these statements and then highlight the information in our opinion letters. So this is our independent auditor's report. I'm going to highlight here. I mentioned that clean opinion. That's at the top of page 2 of the financial statements. That's what, your oversight agencies and all the constituents that look at your audit, make sure you have a clean opinion. So that's where they look first. I want to just highlight a few things. A statement of financial position. These are your assets, your liabilities, and what is left over at the end of the year. Looking at your current assets, a few benchmarks, we really look and make sure that the current ratio is appropriate, that you don't have any concerns there. Looking at your current assets compared to your current liabilities. You guys have a 6-to-1 ratio. Benchmark would be to have 2-to-1. So you have a healthy financial position at year end. We also, look at your net assets without donor restrictions and what your liquidity is, your liquid net asset reserve. So when looking at that 73 million, if you take out the fixed assets and related debt, that would be not liquid. I mean, unless you sold it, but what do you have liquidity at this point in time? And then we take out your prepaids and deposits, and you have about 36.1 million of liquid net asset reserves. That's about 59%. So that's, if you look at your total expenditures, it's about 59% of that. A benchmark for the schools is to have a 3 to 5% reserve based on the size of the organization. So you guys have a very healthy liquid reserve. We also look at, in the nonprofit world, we like to see 3 to 6 months as a good benchmark. Gateway has 7 months of reserve, so healthy financial position there. Moving along to your statement of activities, no significant changes in the presentation, although you will see different numbers if you were to look at the previous year. I highlighted those that had a significant change. You had a significant increase in your federal revenue as expected due to the CARES Act dollars. Last year you had 3.4 million, this year you have 8.6 million. Also in state revenue, you had additional CARES Act COVID-19 money related to some state programs. And so you'd see a significant increase there. Your total expenses, of course, went up in relation to having more of that funding to utilize. You can see here, this shows your increase in net assets. You had a 12.0 million increase in net assets to bring your net reserve down to 76 million. Okay, moving along here, we look at this is those functional expenses, and we look at those allocations between your program and supporting services. I just wanted to highlight here that you guys spend about 87%, so 87 cents on the dollar on your educational program. You know, benchmark we typically see is, you know, greater than between 70 and 80%, 70 to 90%. You guys are well into spending most of your dollars on your program. So highlighting that there. And in comparison to last year, very consistent. You had 86% last year. So very, very comparable there. So your statement of cash flows, this shows your cash and how it was used and then how it increased and decreased based on your operating and investing and financing activities. Notes to financial statements. These are all the notes, those footnotes that help support and explain everything going on within the financial statements. Not a lot of change here in relation to the prior year. I do want to highlight, your significant accounting policies. This is how your revenue is recognized, your expenditures are incurred. I do want to highlight here that there's a new pronouncement that's quite significant that will be applicable to the organization as of June 30, 23. This has to do with leases and the way that you have to account for them now. Currently, lease obligations that are considered operating leases, meaning they're not non-financing type transaction, they're just disclosed in your footnotes as an obligation that you have into future years. This standard changes in that it requires the asset and actually the obligation to be reflected on your statement of net financial position. So your balance sheet will look a little bit different. That's this statement right here. In future years, we'll actually show those right to use assets with your property and equipment. And then those assets will be depreciated over the useful life, which is the life of that lease that you have. And then you will also see a right to use asset like the lease obligation here in the footnotes in the financial statements under current and non-current liability. So in addition to debt, you will have lease obligations reflected in the financials. As far as the impact to the P&L, the profit and loss statement, it's a pretty net impact. The impact's pretty consistent. It's now just more of, you'll have depreciating assets versus operating lease expense and that sort of thing. Okay, moving along, liquidity and availability of resources. It's a newer footnote that was required about 3 years ago. It shows your available assets for general expenditures within 1 year. So you have about 28.7 million available in the next fiscal year. Very healthy position there. Moving along, looking at your property and equipment, you had some assets that were in progress last year that completed this year. So you see a shift from construction in progress up to your building and improvements. You have your line of credit, your debt footnote here. This shows your future maturities over the next 5 years and thereafter. And this operating footnote here, this is this operating leases. That's the one I mentioned that will be changing in the next 2 years. So basically starting 7/1 of 22 and year ending June 30, 23, these assets and obligations will be reflected on the financial statements. Net assets, you have some board designated net assets. There hasn't been any change in that. There's 4.25 million of reserve of net assets without donor restrictions. Those are things the board has chose to set aside, but of course with board approval could be moved out of board designation at any moment. And then finally here, we have net assets with donor restrictions. There's an increase here. There was roughly about 94, not too much last year, about 94,000. This year you have 2.2. And that has to do with these new grants, with the ELL grant, the funding that was provided, the entitlements of the state that have not yet been spent, but have a restriction in how they can be spent. So that is tracked by management to utilize those in the future based on what is required by the granting agency. You guys participate in Calpers and Calstrs. These disclosures just outline the plan. No significant changes in these disclosures from the previous year. Just highlighting here with Calpers, there was a $1.7 million contribution into that plan this year. Calstrs talks about the funding status as well as the total contributions of 3.7 to Calstrs. No significant changes here in these disclosures. Your typical contingencies that you have federal and state funds, risks and uncertainties. This is something that's just been disclosed as required by the AICPA. It has to do with that the disruption that schools and most organizations have been experiencing during the pandemic, and that there's some volatility to your financials related to that. And then you have a related party disclosure related to the Charters Foundation that supports the school. Moving along, the supplementary information section, this is what's required by the oversight agencies, your districts, the state controller's office, the CDE. They like to see, the governing board and administration in place during that fiscal year. The board of directors here, as well as the instructional time. This looks a little bit different than last year. Usually it's minutes that's disclosed. This year, due to the distance learning, they wanted to see instructional days offered versus what was required. This schedule of expenditures of federal awards, I mentioned that we did a separate audit over under the uniform guidance requirement. We tested your education stabilization fund, the 2.1 million there. We also tested the Corona Relief Virus Fund, and you had 2.1 spent and 3.4 million spent of the total 8.6 audited. So you're required to have, being a low risk auditee, 25% of expenditures tested. Being that they were both considered high risk, the feds required us to audit both of those programs this year. This next schedule is the combining statement of financial position. So as I mentioned, we issue our opinion on the total of the financial statements as a whole, the 96 million of assets there, the 96 million of liabilities and net assets. But the oversight agencies, they really care about what's going on in each school because you have a separate charter for each organization. And so that information is tracked so they can see, the oversight agencies can verify what has been reported on your unaudited actuals to what has been audited here. And so these combining schedules are actually required so they can verify that, the information is accurate and complete at each site level. We give an in relation to opinion. So we do a significant amount of work making sure that revenue and expenses, assets, or things are reflected in the proper site location. So we do ensure that revenues, although we're issuing an opinion in total, we do ensure that if you have a Title I grant, that it's reflected in the proper site. And then you have a combining statement of functional expenses. We talked about your functional expenses. This is just at the site level. So quite a few pages there for all the locations. Again, the oversight agencies need to see all of that information. And then finally, the last section here is our other independent auditors reports. Here is a letter that's a report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance. As part of our audit, we gain an understanding of your internal controls and your internal controls over compliance, not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on your compliance. Rather, it helps us design our audit procedures and how we determine things are high risk or low risk and how we spend our time auditing those areas. This is a clean, I guess I could say a clean letter. There are no material weaknesses or significant deficiencies to report. So we do indicate that given the limitations, we didn't identify any deficiencies in internal controls that we consider to be material weaknesses. Lastly, here, we didn't have any non-compliance matters to report either. That would also be indicated here if there were some issues. The next report here is what we call our opinion on state compliance. It talks about management's responsibility for the programs, our responsibility to audit those programs in compliance with the audit guide that's published every year. Here's our opinion right down here. It's opinion on state compliance. Again, there was a clean opinion. We didn't have any findings on any of the new state compliance procedures. And they had a significant amount with the attendance and distance learning. That was quite a significant change this year. So I highlighted these two sections as they were substantially changed from the previous year. So great job to your team in that regard. And then finally is our last opinion letter. This is over the federal programs in compliance with the required guide of the uniform guidance. And so this talks about management's responsibility for the federal regulations. What we do is we come in and ensure that they're following all the protocols of the uniform guidance. There's about 14 elements per program. We pick what's determined to be direct and material based on information published by the federal guidance. And then we audit those procedures. And so again, here's our final opinion here on the major federal programs. The two that I mentioned that we tested were the new CARES Act programs, and we didn't have any findings to report for those. So great job on those programs. And then lastly, this is something also required in the formatting of the report is the findings and question cost section. This just highlights the summary of our audit results, everything we've talked about, unmodified opinions on the financial statements, the state programs, and the federal programs. These are a summary of the federal programs that we tested and that you qualify as a low-risk auditee. You don't qualify for that if you have findings in any given year. So it's a good thing that you guys still qualify as a low-risk auditee. And then here, this highlights here the findings and question cons that there in this section that there's no findings to report in either the financial statements, federal compliance, or state compliance. And then finally, the status of the prior year findings. You had some findings in the ACES program, and then the unduplicated pupil count in previous years, and we did not have any findings to report this year. And so we just indicated that there's no non-compliance noted. So that was a lot of information. I know I breezed through some of that, but wanted to make sure I hit the highlights there. If there's any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer them. If there's something you'd like to talk about offline, I'm happy to answer any emails as well at a different, later date. Happy to do that. Are there any questions about anything I've shared?
Board members, any questions? Jack.
No questions. I just want to say to Omira, congratulations. I think you handled the most complicated K-12 budget in the whole Sacramento area. I can't think there's any budget that would compete with that. And just an excellent audit report. I just want to carry that. And welcome to the team.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Can I just say, and I'm sure that Omira meant this as well, she did do an amazing job, but she also has an amazing team, and her entire team helped contribute to providing everything that Sarah and Raul needed. And along with recognizing Omira's excellent showing up with integrity around this complicated audit, also want to recognize Sarah and Raul and her team, because it's equally complicated for them. It's not one audit, it's really 9 audits, which is again always what makes it a little more challenging for everyone. So I think the other person who isn't named in any of this, but I want to be sure I call out and affirm, is Dr. Christine McCormick, who is kind of our go-to person on all these various programs and fundings in terms of the compliance part. And I think you heard from Sarah that we were in fact, in compliance and a clean audit in relation to things related to compliance, including ACES and the very complicated new independent study attendance that we had to do. And I really want to give credit to Christine for leading the organization in creating those systems for us.
Yeah, I just put everything together, but yes, it's a team effort to make sure that we have a clean audit, and this is a reflection of all our staff in our organization, and in making sure that things are spent in the right places, and that we close the books, even though we had difficulties closing, that we did our rounds, making sure that things looked reasonable and things were correct. So yeah, from everybody in my team having to pull information, there was a lot of requests in terms of ESSER and one time. Like Sarah mentioned, there's a lot of new programs and new federal guidelines in terms of reviewing these programs. So it was a lot, trying to interpret what was done last year and how does that impact our current year audit. So it was definitely a learning curve, but we're happy it's done. And like Cindy said, it's a team effort, and You know, I celebrate everybody every time I have a chance to mention it's a clean audit, because it's work that everybody's put in one way or another to make sure that it's clean.
That's right. Complex audit as well. Yes. So great job. Great job.
Any other comments or questions from board members? I just wanted to second what Jack said before, and I'd amplify it a little further. I think it's probably the most complicated, not just in the Sacramento region, but way beyond that, for any school district really with 5,000 kids. It's probably the most complicated, close to in the state, I would say.
Yeah, every other district of 5,000 gets to do one audit and
Yes.
one budget and one LCAP, and that's yeah. And I think the other part is that we allow each school to have some autonomy. So it's not like it's 9 replications. They are very unique, and so it is 9 audits, 9 budgets, 9. So definitely appreciate that, Bruce. Thank you.
And I do know, having been through many audits, that it really is an all hands on deck kind of operation, because auditors tend to like information from all across the district, and it's not like it's just the business office. It goes way beyond that in terms of providing information and so forth. So I'd like to just make sure those people that were involved, which is just about everybody, gets their credit for that. Is a very good audit and nicely presented this evening.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for allowing me to be here. And I really we appreciate our relationship with you. And certainly, I'm sure Omira is probably like, oh, good, I don't have to talk to them for a while. But you know, it's a process that has to happen, and both parties try and make the best of it and get through all the new changes, because there's more coming for the next year as well. So anyhow, we appreciate your time and appreciate the relationship. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, then I would accept a motion to approve the audit or receive the audit. Jack Turner,
I move approval.
Second.
Mr. Block seconds. Any other comments or questions? If not, we'll go to a roll call. Mr. Anderson?
Yes.
Mr. Block?
Yes.
Ms. Campbell's not present. Mr. Turner?
Yes.
And myself, yes. So that ayes have it. Again, thank you for your evening, and I think it's a very nice, well done presentation.
Thank you. You guys have a great one. I'm going to log off then.
Thank you. Now
All
you're
right, have a
you're
good
welcome
night.
to
Bye.
join the rest of us, but for us the rest of the meeting if you like. But
I always enjoy coming live. I do. All right. We'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.
thank you. Okay, that moves us to superintendent's comments.
Update. Superintendent's update.
Okay.
You guys get a comment, I get an update. Okay. So just want to say welcome, and we're excited to be in February. And I know Miss Lily is not here. I would have given her a hard time and reminded everybody her birthday's next week. I believe she's a Valentine's baby. So we will send early birthday wishes to our board president, who's not able to be with us right now. We have been in the midst of some excitement today. We are in the middle of re-recording our marketing videos for the GCC and our schools. The last time we did this, when was it? Was it like, has it been about 10 years? Feels like it's been 10 years. But I can tell you this, in terms of the relevancy of the material we have, a lot has changed since we last did marketing videos. And so we're real excited today. Both Jason and I were being videotaped, talking about our passion, our purpose, our vision, our mission. I know that our videographer went out to various sites, and she has a few more days of that. So looking forward to sharing some of that with you. And there may be an opportunity that we are seeking to see what we can do to include you in some of that in a COVID safe manner. So we will get back to you on that. Speaking of COVID, Sacramento County and Yolo County are experiencing a decrease in their overall COVID-19 positivity rates. We believe we're nearing the end of the winter surge from after the holidays, but we continue to educate our families and our students and our staff in terms of the need to vaccinate and be boosted, continue to be tested, continue to wear your masks, although not in public schools, but if you go out to eat next week, if you're vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask, according to Governor Newsom. The in-public masking requirement next week will be expired. If you are vaccinated, you can go into public places. Unfortunately, that does not apply to schools. Okay, we're still held to the same masking and testing and vaccination requirements we've been held to. You may have heard that there are some states that are beginning to set a timeline for when those masks will no longer be at schools. We are not one of those states. CDC is still not making any motion towards that. We will keep you and our families and staff aware of any changes to that. I had shared with you last week that we had gotten some inside information that we were going to have a difficult day on Friday, that there was going to be a bit of protesting, come to school without your mask. And I think that our inside information wasn't as trustworthy as it has been in the past, because we only had a few students who actually showed up and needed to go home with their parents because their political statement was not going to allow them onto campus. So, but it was not as big as we had thought it might be. Also, we want to make you aware that nothing has changed in the fact that Dr. McCormick, Jason Sample, and I and other staff continue to attend all the updates necessary to understand what Cal, OSHA, CDPH, CDC, and every other local public health agency is saying about now and into the future for COVID. Also wanted to tell you that I was able to attend the first in-person Access Superintendent Symposium for part of last week. I think it was last week, and probably had about 2/3 of the attendance that usually shows up in person. There were many COVID protocols, a lot of showing your test results, a lot of showing your vaccination results, masking required, a lot of outdoor venues. We were outside a lot. So, but there was a lot of good information and a lot of good networking and a lot of need for superintendents to come together and commiserate over their pain during leadership in pandemic. So at the same time as I was there, they held a concurrent meeting that was the FCMAT board meeting. I am honored to continue to be there to represent GCC and charters. I think this is my 12th year on the board representing charter schools. It's a great place for us. We were given a shout out for the work that we do to support FCMAT in the review of their various documents that they create for charter schools. And so definitely wanted you to hear that our work is being affirmed there. On Friday, I was able to provide my annual presentation to aspiring CBOs at the SECESA FCMAT CBO Mentor Program. I believe that's my 12th time as well, actually. And it was a real honor to take 2 hours to try to discuss 20 years worth of information about charter schools. It was quick, it was a lot, and there were a lot of great conversations in the classroom about charter schools. So the future, I have been telling Jason and Christine, is I think it's about time they took over doing those. I think they could handle it as a team. So I'm still working on them, just so you know. I told them I would give them my 145 slides. So this week we concluded our final GCC coffee with the cabinet, and we have had great times doing our coffee with cabinet and enjoyed being on Zoom with people. And Jason enjoyed talking about football and sports, and Christine brought up the Kings, and all I had left to talk about was my grandbabies. So, but we had a good time. We had a good time, and Miss O'Meara was able to attend most of those as well. And that's the first time some of our staff have met her since business services kind of gets locked away in their office sometimes and doesn't get out on sites as often. But Coffee with Cabinet has given way to the superintendent's spring presentations that will be starting any moment, and we're beginning the preparations for that. We also want to affirm the community engagement team. We had an amazing 5th annual GCC Parent Summit. Unfortunately still on Zoom, but we had a really good turnout. We honored the life of a local community member who has in fact made a huge impact on the Slavic community, Michael Otkiv, who has also been a supporter of our EPIC charter and our families there. And we had a moment of silence for his passing and honoring his life. But we also had a good time coming together with parents to talk about how they can support the success of their students. So really want to affirm the community engagement department for continuing to find ways to grow the role of our parents. I am still deep in a whole bunch of coaching programs and practicing that work. I think I've shared with you. I just concluded the AXA Principal Leadership Coaching Program. I am in the middle of the AASA Principal Supervisors Program, and I just completed the UC Davis Coaching Program. The point of all of these was to learn what was best practice and see how we can integrate it into some of the things that we're doing. Dr. McCormick and Dr. Gold and I are already talking about ways to include some of that great learning in our next year's administrators evaluation and support process. So you will hear more about that. And then again, I want to thank the board for their patience in relation to our mid-year retreat. We have had some difficulties getting everybody's schedule to work together, but we have, in case you haven't calendared it yet, arrived at March 8th and March 9th, and it should be in your calendar. And we have a lot of good information to be sharing with you. We look forward to your input, your guidance, your wisdom as we come together for our mid-year board retreat. And Mr. Mandrick, with that, it's the end of my superintendent's update. I'm sorry, we can't hear you. So
Thank you. Been a very busy time. Obviously, appreciate the information and comments. Any questions or comments from the board? Seeing none, we'll move on to our first study session item, which is COVID-19 and schools update.
COVID-19, anything COVID-19 is the team of Jason Sample and Dr. Christine McCormick. So I will let them update you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Peterson. Good evening, Vice President Mangridge and members of the board. Thank you so much. Tonight, Dr. McCormick and I would like to just kind of give you a brief update of where we are in terms of COVID-19 and the work that we're doing. Next slide. So the first, as Dr. Peterson shared during her update, we are seeing a decrease in positivity rates in both Sacramento and Yolo counties, which we are again, extremely happy and ecstatic about. As public health has shared, this is really the post-holiday surge that we experience really coming to an end. And so they are beginning to do some pre-model and preparation for kind of the next holiday period, which is around spring break. They're encouraging that we continue our diligence around testing, which we are excited to continue that work, not only with our staff, but also with our families. As Dr. Peterson shared, you may have been seeing in the news today and the last few days that the universal masking mandate in terms of for businesses is coming to an end. County Public Health, this is actually hot off the press. Just this evening sent out a notice letting us know that the public health guidelines for our county is not changing for schools at this time, and they were very clear to share that, and neither has that information been changed at the state. So we will continue to help our parents and staff understand that guidelines in terms of masking will not change for schools at this time. Finally, we continue to track and monitor really what I call the politics of COVID and looking at the various pieces of legislation that is moving through our legislator at this time, some things around vaccinations, other things around ADA, protection for charter schools. Even on this past week, our director of Governmental Relations and Parent Engagement, Sergei Terekov, gave testimony in terms of our support of a bill that is going through. And so we continue to really track and monitor the legislative process and add our voice where appropriate in terms of advocating for our families and students in schools. With that being said, Dr. McCormick.
So our current percentage of staff that is considered to be fully vaccinated really hasn't changed since our last update, and we're continuing our 4 testing sites to meet the mandate of the governor. But the update that we do have is we were able to receive the first half of our at-home test shipment that we have been waiting for to be able to distribute to families as well as staff, which really helps to increase our testing capacity, which has been something that public health has really encouraged us to do, so that we're not having staff, even if they're fully vaccinated, being dependent on trying to find an at-home test. So it has been nice to have that opportunity even for our families. Just even today, we had some students that weren't feeling well. So being able to have the school site hand a home test kit to a family and feel that staff feel safe, students feel safe, and families feel safe because we have that access to testing for staff and students. And then I think the exciting part, and why I had to put my woohoo here, is we have seen a dramatic decrease in our staff positivity rates. And what that means is when we go down to this 6.37, that means our classroom quarantines go down and our staff quarantines go down, which is exciting news, which means we have kids in school, we have kids with their teachers. We are as close to as normal. I don't like to use that word because I'm not even sure what it means anymore. But when I was talking with one of the school sites today, they're like, we have nobody out. And I don't think we have heard those words in months. So that is our excitement around our status here at the GCC. And then, as always, we are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions or comments from the board? Really appreciate that update. We're all going to keep our fingers crossed. I hope there are better days coming.
I think you and all of us are in the same space. Is this real? Can we see a light at the end of the tunnel? Might we get through? So I too want to affirm Dr. McCormick and Mr. Sample, particularly Dr. McCormick and the nursing team and many others. We gave them a little appreciation gift this week because many people have been working long hours, weekends, contract tracing. There's just been a lot asked of people. And so really want to remind the board that we have an amazing team who's going the extra mile, and Dr. McCormick has been leading that charge. So really want to affirm her for that.
Very good. That leads us to our second study session, the LCAP mid-year update.
And we are lucky to once again hear from Dr. McCormick on LCAP. So it is your floor, Dr. McCormick.
Thank you. And before I begin, I need to also affirm my Ed Services team, including our data team and my partners over on Fiscal Services. This LCAP mid-year update is something new that we've never had to do, and it was all hands on deck to not only understand what components and parts we needed to do, but how we put that together for everyone. So thank you to my entire team for coming together to help us move forward. You have all of the components of the mid-year update attached as information items. So those are the variety of reports. I'm going to give you a summary of what's included in those reports and what we're expected to report to you as a board regarding the local control accountability plan at sort of our halfway point. So this is a component of Assembly Bill 130. It is as far as we know, only required for this current fiscal year that we need to provide you this annual sort of mid update. It has several components. The largest component really has to do with the budget overview for parents to show transparency with those additional dollars that came in, either federal dollars or the additional supplemental and concentration funds that were given to schools post the development of the LCAP. We also needed to include a supplement to the annual update that talks about how we as an organization engaged our stakeholders, how the school sites connected the additional dollars to work that needed to be specifically targeted based on how those funds were received. All of that was interconnected with giving you an update on their metrics and what progress they may have made in their LCAP. And then finally, we had to tie expenditures. So of those items that we included in the LCAP, where were we as far as spending, and how, if that also may have included federal dollars that we had before or that we added to later. So there were several prompts to the first part, which was the annual update. I've talked about several of these already, but it really was the opportunity for the school sites to revisit with their what is now called engagement partners to make sure that there was conversation at all levels, that these additional dollars were expended in a way that aligned with the mission and vision of the school, that aligned with the goals that they had set out, and included community members as well. In addition to that, we had to ensure that those additional supplemental and concentration grant dollars were targeted specifically to the students that generated those funds, because we had additional funds that were, again, as I mentioned before, given to us post the development of the LCAP or the development of the budget when we presented it to you in June. So this is just a quick view of the components of what we would have seen in the LCAP. So they have a goal and then there's a metric. We created baselines as of 2020, and then we dreamed to what our outcome would be for 23-24. This mid-year update is compared to that baseline, where they think we are and what we have accomplished at this point. We're in some cases going to show you that we may be close to that 23-24 outcome. And in others, you'll see that they've not made any progress, and it doesn't mean they're not going to. We just may not have data yet to be able to communicate that. And then finally, when we had our budgeted expenditures, we will show you what was developed as far as the budget when we presented the LCAP to you in June. And then as of first interim, what our estimated actuals were. And for those, we also may have on target or approaching target, but that is part of the discussions that Omira, my team, and her team are having with each of the school sites to see. We had this in as an LCAP expense relative to, say, the federal dollars. Is that appropriate? Should we be noting for your final annual update, which I'll bring to you in June, that we move those to a different funding source? So this has actually been a nice sort of mid-year check-in exercise that I don't think we have ever thought about doing in the past. And we may do it internally because it has, I think, resulted in some good conversations that we may not have already had. So it's a little visual of what you'll see for each of the metrics and those attachments. We may, as I mentioned, know what the outcome is. We may have it in progress, or we absolutely know where we are, depending on what we've been able to do based on those metrics. We created 4 different levels of report for you in those attachments. You'll either see that a metric is on track to meet target or has met that target. We met with each of the school sites and said, we notice we don't have data here. Do you anticipate you'll have data that may meet this target? Or we don't have any data, and that means because it's not a priority this year for a variety of reasons. Often, I'll use professional development as an example. They had put items into the LCAP that they had expected, and then COVID has either canceled those events or made them not be accessible. So you'll see an indication with some that says that they will not meet the target. That's, again, at this point in time, this LCAP goes to the 23-24 school year. So we may report back to you in June that we've made progress because things have opened up or something has changed. And then for many of the metrics, we don't yet have the data. A lot of the metrics are relative to our end of the year assessments around CASP, around the California School Dashboard. And so we don't have that data yet. That will come to us, and we'll have it ready for you when we present the annual update and the LCAP moving forward for the next school year. Okay. Expenditures had very similar items that we had to report that we did for each of the metrics. Some activities we may not have started, some may be in progress, or some may be fully expended. The larger component that we had to do for this particular mid-year update was really identify how our budget overview for parents had changed based on what we presented not only to our parents as part of the adopted LCAP, but now as part of the sort of mid-year update. So for some of our schools, you see that we had a positive effect with those dollars. In total LCFF, which would mean your base and your supplemental and concentration grants together, and then just the supplemental and concentration grants pulled out. Other schools, you'll notice that it went down, and it really depended on whether we had ADA adjustments based on our expected outcomes when we put the budget together for the LCAP, and what actually sort of came through in the final at the first interim after we made all the adjustments. So some you saw our LCFF as a whole went down, but supplemental and concentration went up. So lots of different components here, but the intent of the budget overview for parents was to be transparent on what those items were and be able to address how we were going to, if we were receiving additional dollars, make adjustments, or if we were receiving less dollars, make adjustments to our LCAP metrics. And then none of this work could we do without recognizing that the pandemic has truly impacted our ability to implement many of the components of the LCAP that we had all dreamed and hoped and wanted to do for each of our school sites. But I really felt that it was important that we recognize that despite all the things that have been confronted for our schools, that have been presented to them when we started a school year that we never thought would start the way we had ended one, that they have done everything they can to provide services to students in new, different, and unique ways to make sure that they are providing the best education for every student within the GCC. And our school teams just, I can't applaud them enough for the work that they have done. And then for me to also come back to them and say, oh, and by the way, I need to check in on all these metrics. So I appreciate their patience, their responsiveness, and just being there for all of our students and for all of us when we needed them. So happy to answer any questions. And as I said, you have all the documents that are included in that information item.
Okay, thank you for that report. Comments, questions, a lot of information there, a lot of good information there, and a lot more to be received later. Mr. Turner.
Yes, this is kind of a global question. What year was LCAP created again with the Governor Brown, and was there not a termination date built into the legislation for it? It seems to have morphed into something quite, over a period of time. Just concerned that not only the GCC, but across the K-12 segment, there will be an addiction to this revenue coming in.
Well, you know what I think, and maybe Christine will add to it if she doesn't mind me jumping in here. I can't tell you the exact date. It feels like it's
13,
been forever.
14, I think.
There you go. But what's interesting, Jack, is it was a manna from heaven, wonderful gift to the world when it came, because Governor Brown said, no more categoricals. You get to have local freedoms. And it was not what it is today in terms of the 6,000 different hoops you have to follow. And it's become more and more and more, kind of reminds me of charter schools, more and more regulated, right? And more pieces and more requirements. And unfortunately, as you also, Jack, are very aware of, it's not as if we haven't gotten alongside of it 5,000 categoricals now.
Mm-hmm.
So we really, I mean, the idea that Brown supported was, let's just put all the money in a place where you have flexibility. But now we have that small place of flexibility, but all the money's being put in special pots again. So really we've eroded back to categorical dollars again. So Christine, what I didn't mean to take away what you wanted to say in addition to that.
Oh, no. Jason put in the chat, it was 2013. So I think I was close.
Look at you guys.
But I don't have anything particularly different to say, but it was when we first found out we were going to have this local control plan and we were going to be able to really drive how we did our spending. And I always remember my school garden money that I could never spend. This was going to be the chance. And I think we've gone through multiple versions of the documentation. There's a new one coming in case you were worried. We have another little change that'll be coming when I present to you at the end of this school year. So I agree. We went from what I hope to a multi-page document that I'm not sure tells the story we intended to tell.
Thank you very much. And I can't wait for the report at the end of the year.
I know everyone waits.
Hold your breath. Don't hold your breath.
Okay, no other comments, questions? Then we move on to, I assume we covered really item number 6 in that process as well. So that moves us to item number 7, the consent agenda, where we have the adoption of the minutes of the last meeting, personnel consent, purchases over $30,000, updates in GCC employee handbook, our 22-23 school year calendar, several MOUs with outside agencies for various programs, some revised job descriptions, and social worker intern mentor stipends. So with that, I would accept the motion to approve the consent agenda. Mr. Turner,
Move approval.
I have a second.
Second.
Second, Mr. Block. Thank you very much. Are there any questions or specific items that the board wants to talk about? Mr. Turner.
Just a comment on the agreement at the MOU with the Los Rios district. I think it must be almost 10 years ago we met with the Chancellor Brian King, and finally after this period of time we have the agreement. I strongly support it, and it's a great asset, and I certainly will encourage the promotion of it with the students that it will benefit.
Thank you, Jack. Any other comments? If not, we'll move to roll call. Mr. Anderson.
Yes.
Mr. Block.
Yes.
Ms. Campbell's not present. Mr. Turner.
Yes.
And I approve, vote yes as well. Motion carries. Item 8, we have covered already in the independent audit report. So that, I believe, moves us down to board comments. Any other board comments? If not, then I guess we will move into closed session. And I'll turn that over probably to the mechanical geniuses.
Well, that must be Melissa because, but what we are going to do in closed session is it will be myself in terms of staff, myself, Deputy Superintendent Sample, and Dr. McCormick, because one of these items is hers. So Miss Melissa, if you will handle putting up the sign that we're in closed session and sending us out to closed session. All right. Mr. Vice President, we appear to be back.
Okay, we are back into open session. I do want to report that the board did take action to stipulate the board expulsion or the student expulsion as presented. With that, that moves us on to report of the next board meeting.
Miss Melissa, what's our next date of our board meeting?
Our next board meeting is actually the retreat on March 8th and 9th.
Okay, more information will follow, more specifics will follow on that, but March 8th and 9th.
And we do have also listed the board retreat as well. Okay, that brings us to board comments. Are there any board comments? Any last questions? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Jack,
I
motion.
move we adjourn. You run a really tight meeting, Bruce, so.
Well, I won't give up the position to Lily's. I mean,
And I talked to Lily yesterday, and I knew she had some issues. I hope she's doing better. So
We'll send her your best wishes.
for the board. And okay, so all that voice vote, all those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
I.
All those opposed, saying none. Thank you all very much for the evening, and I guess we are adjourned.
Are adjourned.